Hi, I'm Heather Darch, and this is a presentation by the Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network. Many small rural villages and hamlets scattered across the province have disappeared over time and are now nearly forgotten. In this series called Raising Spirits, we are telling the stories of our vanishing heritage. We are looking for what remains of early settlements in Quebec's eastern townships. The foundations of homes, schools, mills, and churches represent little communities that were, at one time, filled with life. We are telling these stories before they disappear forever. This is Malmaison.
I got interested in the history because being born here and grew up here and listening to some of the stories of the people that were my neighbors at the time, mostly Heyligens, Patrick, Kathleen, Norman, they would tell the stories about this great little town that was here. And so I became curious, and when I had some free time, I would go off to the local museum and pick up a paper or something and read about the history of this local area. And as a result, I became a little bit of not an expert, believe me, but I became to know how this town came about, how it lost its vigor, and what happened after to its present state. My name is Marcel Heyligen. I am right now presently located in the present-day town of Notre Dame de Stanbridge, but where we are located today used to be the hamlet of Malmaison. Malmaison was the result of a family called the de Rivières who established themselves around the 1830s. Around 1841, 42, and 43, they built a manor house, a covered bridge, a grist mill, a dam, and the school behind me, which was built much later to help with the children that was in the village of Malmaison. Malmaison came about because the people who work for the de Rivière family needed a place to live, and therefore they built their homes close to where they worked. There were approximately 8 or 9 houses, I believe, on this side of the river, and there were a couple on the other side that worked at the grist mill. Now, how did the de Rivière family acquire this piece of land? In 1800, Mr. Hugh Finlay requested to the Crown that he receive a land grant. And in 1801, he was granted the canton of Stanbridge, which was 31,000 acres, with partners. And one of his partners was James McGill. Hugh Finlay was a businessman in Montreal, like James McGill, in the fur trade, general merchandise, and also the first Postmaster General of Canada. But a year later, due to financial troubles, he sold his shares to James McGill, who acquired most of the canton with other people who still had minority shares. Although it was often rumored that James McGill came to the canton, he never did. He died in 1813 and never set foot on this property. James McGill married a widow who had 2 children. The widow was the wife of one of his business partners, and these 2 sons acquired the property from the McGill estate. One died because of a duel, and the other one had 2 sons, which he later left the canton to, and they were the first de Rivière members who came to this canton. François Guillaume and his brother Henri eventually were curious about what they had inherited. And about 1830, François showed up, decided he liked the area, built a house, and 10 years later, his brother, who was curious about why his older brother was coming down here, decided that yes, this was a good business opportunity, and therefore they built the manor house, the grist mill, covered bridge, and a sawmill, all at about that time. And then as a result of their influence in this area, people gravitated to this area, lived in this area, and that's how Malmaison came about. As the village grew, there was a church built not far away. A post office was eventually built here as the Central Vermont Railroad passed within a half a mile of here. And the school behind me were all built about 1863. So the school, the general store, post office, and the train station were approximately all about the same period of time. This is the grist mill side and the carding mill. As you can see, there are several lots in the back of it where the employees of this part of the complex live. The sawmill was in this little point here, the first sawmill, and the dam was across the river here. This is the part of the Malmaison that I own. My parents' house, or where I grew up, is this lot at the front. And the general store, which is now attached to the back of that house, used to be on this corner lot, right here on the corner of this road, St. Charles and de Rivière. The school we're in now is on this lot, which was up the road. The manoir is located here, at this part of the property. And the second sawmill is located at this state, right about approximately here. This is the one that has the steam engine. If you look a little bit farther to the north, you will see this used to be the original church emplacement, and a little bit farther north is the present-day cemetery, which is still in existence and still being maintained as of today. These are the names of the people that lived in Malmaison. Now, how did our family wind up in this part of the world? My grandparents were from Belgium, and after the war, there were not a lot of possibilities. My grandparents grew up on small farms, and they heard about this great country, Canada. My father was in the process of marrying my mother, who was the daughter of my grandfather, and he decided that he was going to tag along. So in the fall of 1951, they got on a ship in Belgium, went over to England, got onto a bigger boat, and came to Canada. And as my grandfather was looking for land, there was a lot of other immigrants, Belgian, Germans, Swiss, in this area. So he felt that it was a good place. He liked the way the location of the land. So in 1951, he bought the farm that was originally the major location of Malmaison. Now, what caused the village to decline? Well, as the years went on, the children of the two de Rivière brothers were taking over the estate, and unfortunately one of them wasn't a very good businessman, not like his uncle and his brother. After a few years of bad management, he was known to be a gambler. He loved horse racing, and unfortunately during a horse race he had an accident and became more or less incapacitated. He ran the estate poorly and lost much of it for reasons of payments to other people. The people that worked for the de Rivière family, some were French Canadian, some were Irish, and the most important Irish name that keeps showing up is the Heyligen family. The Heyligen family had settled on a farm on the next range over, and that's where they first settled. But having a large family, many of the sons had to find work other places, and a couple of them were employed by the de Rivière family. Being astute men, they acquired over time the assets of the de Rivière family, which mostly were in the wood business. They were lumber merchants. They also were hay merchants. They took over the sawmill. And eventually, when Willie, which was Francois Guillaume, died, his wife could no longer support the estate and sold it to the Heyligen family. So therefore, the de Rivière family ended in about that period of time, and the lumber industry was declining. The grist mill had competition from the next town over, which was known at that time as St. Charles. It was growing faster than the town here, and therefore more people gravitated towards the new town, and that eventually became the town we're in today, which is Notre Dame de Stanbridge. The sawmill, which is now fallen down, is actually the second sawmill. The first sawmill was water powered. The second sawmill was steam powered. But when steam became out of step, when electricity came, that went down. So the business of the town of Malmaison more or less dissipated. People moved out of this town. They moved in next door, which is just a couple of kilometers down the road. And they took up residence there and no longer here. The farm was mortgaged to a bank, which had all the lots from the original Malmaison, so that the John Heyligen, who acquired the manoir and the remaining estate of the Derivières, could afford to buy it. The bank held on to it and leased it out to people for a couple of years, and finally, eventually, a Derriot family acquired the farm, which became one single unit, no longer a town. And in 1951, my grandfather bought it from the Derriot family, and that's how I became owner of the Malmaison. There are some very interesting vestiges still of the town. My parents lived in the house that was built by John Heyligen in approximately 1886. It's still standing. Behind the original house that my parents were in, the original post office and general store was moved when John Heyligen acquired it, and it was put behind the house and used as a summer kitchen for the main house because there was no air conditioning in those days. And when they had the wood stove going, they didn't want it in the main house, so they had a summer kitchen, and they used the old general store as their summer kitchen. The Malmaison is not off the map because we still have the original grist mill and carding mill. We still have the bridge that is standing. We still have vestiges of the dam on the riverbanks. We still have the manoir house, and we still have the one-room schoolhouse, which is the second version. The first version wasn't as tall. It was not a story and a half. It was only one story. But later it was modified to add an apartment upstairs for the teacher to stay when she was here, when the school season was open. Otherwise, she would have to stay in the house that was next door to the school with the people who lived there. So as the town has disappeared in the sense of having more than 150 to sometimes maybe 200 people had lived here at one time on the two sides of the river. Now, as you can see, I am, with my son, I'm the only resident of Malmaison. But that's the short history of the town, and it's now a part of just legend, and the people who live here, especially the Heyligen family, who are the last vestiges and owners of the original nameplates. My interest, and I feel sorry about this, is that the people who live in this area don't know the history of this area. They don't understand that the people, how they worked, how they cleared the land, and how at one time this was a very large hub of commerce. And how could it disappear? And it was simply the fortunes of lumber, a situation where the town next door got bigger and the people liked it better, and there were some richer people in the next town over from the Derivières, and they built a knitting mill, and at one time that knitting mill alone employed close to 200 people, and therefore all the emphasis moved to the town of, which was at that time not called Notre Dame but St. Charles. And I think it was only in 1912 that the two towns actually refused. Malmaison, which was actually known as Notre Dame des Anges, was amalgamated with St. Charles to become the town of Notre Dame de Stanbridge. And therefore, it no longer was on the maps. It disappeared, and the only remains of the Derivière family and all the people that worked here is the school, the bridge, the mill, and the manoir house.